Good morning, dear students. Hope that all of you are fine and having a great time. Today, we are going to start a new chapter. The name of the chapter is A Shipwrecked Sailor. It is written by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I know that all of you might have come across the name Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Is a very famous writer. So first, let us see his picture. See, you guys can see on the screen that is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Everybody remember his face. Now let us know some interesting details about the biography of the author. Now, Gabriel Garcia Marquez was a Colombian novelist, short story writer, screenwriter, and journalist. He was also called as Gabo. His friend circle and the close people or people near to him used to call him as Gaboli. He was awarded Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1982. 100 Years of Solitude, Love at the Time of Cholera are his notable works. So which are his notable works? 100 Years of Solitude and Love at the Time of Cholera are his notable works. He was a great writer. We could see elements of magic realism in his writings. What is magic realism? When we talk about magic realism, when something magical is described in a realistic background, or something which is magical is described in a normal way so that we feel that it's kind of real itself. That kind of a usage in literature, or when you write story, it's like you completely believe that this is a normal thing when it is actually something supernatural or magical. That kind of a writing is known as magic realism, and our Gabo or Gabriel Garcia Marquez used to apply a lot of magical realism in his works. Hopefully that part about the author is clear to each and every one of you. So now let's move forward and get to know what is actually happening in the starting paragraphs of the chapter. The first two paragraphs of the story displays the scene of a shipwreck, and it introduced the narrator. What is the name of the narrator? Luis Alejandro Velasco is the name of the narrator. He was in the middle of the ocean after the shipwreck. The ship plunged into an abyss and disappeared. The narrator made an attempt to grab the rigging and jump abroad. He heard the shout of Julio Amanda Carabello, a well-built officer, yelling at someone. So, dear students, there is a shipwreck happening, or the shipwreck has happened and the narrator is still confused what actually happened. What has caused this kind of a shipwreck? Why is the narrator so confused? Because it happened all of a sudden. There was no reason for any of this to happen. The day was fine and there was nothing unusual. But then also the shipwreck happened. So he was kind of in a confused state, and in that situation also, or when he is in middle of the ocean also, he is thinking what might be the cause, or what might be the reason for the shipwreck. Am I the only one who is surviving, or am I the only one who is actually out in the sea? But then he suddenly hears one voice, that is of Carabello, one of his fellow sailor. He's actually yelling at someone. So it's now time for individual reading, where you guys can read individually and mark the unfamiliar words. You guys must read it individually and silently, and if you come across some unfamiliar words, then you must underline that. So it's time for collaborative reading. Let your benchmates be your group mates, and each group discuss this paragraph and its content with your group mates, and check whether they are also having some different words which they find it as difficult, or some words which are unfamiliar. If so, mark those words also. Okay, dear students, hopefully you guys must have marked the unfamiliar words and underlined them. Now let's see what their meanings are so that you'll get a proper understanding of the concept that is being discussed in first and second paragraph. So the first unfamiliar word is abyss. Abyss means a deep bottomless chasm, something which is very deep that you don't even find the bottom of it. That is called abyss. See the picture, a deep pit in the ocean that you can't even find the uh, how how deep it is or the length of its bottom. So something which is bottomless, or it's a deep bottomless chasm, it's called abyss. Moving on to the next word, which is choppy. Choppy means having small waves. Here in the first paragraph, we are being told that there was only choppy waves, small waves, but not so dangerous. But they are having random and quick motion, but they are not as dangerous as it's being like tsunami waves or something like that. They are just small waves. Alright? Now moving on to the next word is crate. Crate is a slatted wooden case used for transporting goods. You must have seen crates for transporting vegetables, crates for transporting other goods, crates for transporting electronic items also, so that this acts as a kind of protection to the things, or it is also for transporting, so that lot of things can be easily transported in small crates. So it is a slatted wooden case used for transporting goods. Now moving on to the next word, which is cargo. Cargo means goods carried on a ship, aircraft or motor vehicle. The goods that is being transported from one place to another. It can be by ship, it can be by aircraft, or it can be by a motor vehicle. That good is known as cargo. Now that we have seen the unfamiliar words and got to know its meaning, it's time for model reading. So let me read these passages for you. My first impression was that I was utterly alone in the middle of the ocean. The ship plunged into an abyss and disappeared. I had no idea what was happening. I took hold of one of the bobbing crates and stupidly began to contemplate the sea. It was perfectly clear day, except for the choppy waves produced by the wind and the cargo scattered across the surface. There was no evidence of a shipwreck. Soon I began to hear shouts nearby. Through the sharp whistling of the wind, I recognized the voice of Giulio Amado Carabello, the tall, well-built officer who was yelling at someone, "Fatso, hold there." So now it's the time for you guys to read these two paragraphs, and I'll select one member from each group to read it aloud. Okay, students, you must have heard how your friends have read this paragraph with proper stress and modulation. Now it's a time for me to check whether you guys understood the portion by asking you some scaffolding questions so that I get an in-depth idea on where you guys are standing, and it's also giving me an idea whether I should explain more or if there is any doubt from your side. So, what you guys need to do is to take your notebook and write down the questions. When we are discussing, write the answers along with that and submit in tomorrow's classroom. Okay? So, the first question is, who is the narrator of the story A Shipwrecked Sailor? Hopefully, everyone might have written the question. Now it's time to answer the question. Who is the narrator of the story? Yes, we all know. It's Velasco is the narrator of the story A Shipwrecked Sailor. I'll repeat it one more time so that you guys can write it down in your notebook. Velasco is the narrator of the story A Shipwrecked Sailor. So, next question. What happened to the ship? What happened to the ship? Hopefully you guys must have written the question. Now the answer is ship was wrecked and it plunged into deep abyss. The ship was wrecked and it plunged into the deep abyss. Moving on to the third question. Whose voice did the narrator hear in the sea? Yes, dear students, the narrator, that is Velasco, heard Carabello's voice in the sea. Velasco heard Carabello's voice in the sea. Hopefully all got the answer and have written it down in your notebook. Let's proceed to the next part. That is structural item. So let's look at the structural item named suffix. What is a suffix? Suffix is a letter or a group of letters added to the end of the word to form a new word. Something is added to the, see for example, this is a word, this is a complete word. I'm adding something to the end of the word. So this is the suffix. So this gives a new word. This is the new word. This is a complete word. I'm adding something to the end of the word and this is suffix. And it gives a new word. So example, happen plus ing, happening. It becomes a new word when the suffix ing is being added. So hopefully everyone got an idea about the structural item suffix and how it is being used. Now moving on to our discourse activity. Yes, it's activity time. What are the evidences of the shipwreck described in the paragraph? Or what are the evidences that tells you that there was a shipwreck? Or how do you get to know that there was a shipwreck? So hopefully you understood the question, and now what you have to do is to discuss the answer with your group mates and write it down in the activity card provided. Okay, dear students, hopefully you have written down the answer. Just go through it once again and check your answer. Now it's time for you to exchange your answer. One team should exchange their answer to the next team so that if there is any sort of mistake or editing, the next team can identify that and do the editing. Okay, one of you from each group come and present your answer so that I can hear your answer and do the necessary editing. Yes, I've heard your answers. Now it's the time for you to know my version of the answer. Yes, the teacher's version. So the answer goes like this. The narrator was utterly alone in the middle of the ocean. The ship plunged into an abyss and disappeared. He had no idea what was happening. He took hold of one of the bobbing crates and stupidly began to contemplate the sea. The cargo scattered across the surface of the sea. He heard shouts nearby. So the cargo, the shouts nearby, the ship sinking into the sea, all these are evidences that a shipwreck recently took place. And it was so sudden that narrator is still contemplating about it. Now it's a time for us to conclude the class. So I'll tell you what was happening in the first two paragraphs. So what is actually happening in there? There a shipwreck happened and our narrator Velasco is still contemplating or thinking, how did this happen? It was a normal day, everything was okay, only choppy waves were there, and how did this shipwreck happen? And the ship sank into the deep abyss. So in this confused state, when we are in this confused state, the first two paragraphs are over. And now it's a time for you guys to have a follow-up activity. A follow-up activity is to ensure that you guys actually have this connection, or you guys can actually develop your creative mode of writing. So today's activity is also like that, where you have to write about an unexpected event that happened in your life. As the Velasco's condition, he was not expecting something like this to happen, but something unexpected, that is the shipwreck happened. So you have to write something like that, something unexpected that happened in your life. Okay, dear students, hopefully you'll do the follow-up activity and submit it along with the answers of the scaffolded questions that I've asked in the next class. So take care and be safe. Thank you.